This video is a tutorial for Ret Paladins. It is intended for those players here on Molten who feel that they just aren't doing the DPS that they ought to be doing, but aren't sure why. If you have a guildie who you think might fit into this category, feel free to direct them here. Even if you are doing good DPS, I suggest that you watch the video anyway, as there still might be information here that you find helpful. I will cover 3 primary areas of interest: gearing and itemization, spec and glyphs, and lastly, rotation and playstyle. The first thing I will begin with is actually a brief digression about Gear Score. Gear Score is this add-on that is hideously popular on Molten. What it does is look at all of your gear and then gives you a numerical rating for it based upon item level. For many players, this becomes an obsession. Focusing solely on Gear Score, however, can actually hurt your DPS, as I will demonstrate, so you shouldn't overly concern yourself with it. Items confer stat bonuses to the player who is wearing them. The quality of the item depends on the item being worn, such as an item having strength versus spirit. But the quantity of those stats is determined by a specific formula used by Blizzard. Each item has its own budget for stats. The first factor is the quality of the item. These are green, also known as uncommon, blue, superior, purple, epic, or the ever-elusive legendary items. Poor and uncommon items, gray and white, do not have stats. Next, the slot that the item fills is taken into account. A wand has far less points available to be spent on it than does a chest or a two-handed weapon. I have the relative weightings shown here. Once the budget is determined, it will be spent as closely as possible on different stats. Stats are things like attributes, strength, stamina, intellect, various ratings, crit, hit, expertise, or haste, or things like additional armor or unique item procs. Now this is important because even though an item may be higher in item level, it may not have the right combination of stats to make it good for you. An example of this would be using the tier 10 legs while wielding Glorinzelg. Both items are great, but they aren't so great when you use them in conjunction with one another, since they both have a lot of expertise on them. Doing so effectively lowers the overall item level because you end up wasting lots of your budget on expertise way over and above the cap. If you look only at item level alone, you won't notice things like this. This is also why people get mad when you show up to a raid wearing PvP gear, because a huge amount of the PvP gear's stats are welled up in resilience, which is totally worthless in PvE content. Another comparison I want to make will, I think, be instructive in demonstrating how set bonuses are taken into account. These are 2 of the items that have exactly the same item level. One of them has a set bonus and the other one does not. Notice that the non-set item is, overall, better than the tier 10 chest, assuming you benefit from the hit. This is true of just about every tier versus non-tier pairing. As a general rule, you want to get tier gear whenever possible in order to obtain the set bonuses that it provides, especially tier 9 and tier 10. But you don't want to be exceeding the minimum amount of tier necessary in order to get the bonus. That is to say, you don't want to get 5 pieces to get your 4-piece bonus. Once again, to do so will be to waste your item's budget unnecessarily. Here on Molten, you can donate for whole sets of gear. I strongly advise against donating for a full set of tier 10 or tier 9. This is, of course, not necessarily true for PvP gear. If you're looking to make a donation, what I would instead suggest is that you buy your items a la carte. If you still don't see how Gear Score, which ignores everything but item level, can hurt your DPS, I'll give you one final example. These are the top 14 best in-slot trinkets for Ret Paladins. They are, in order, Tiny Abomination in a Jar, both heroic and non-heroic, Sharpened Twilight Scale, heroic, Death's Choice, heroic, Whispering Fang Skull, heroic, Death's Choice, normal, normal Sharpened Twilight Scale, normal Whispering Fang Skull, Hercum War Token, both Deathbringer's Will, heroic and non-heroic, Darkmoon Card, Greatness, Needle Encrusted Scorpion, and Banner of Victory. Notice anything about the trinket list that strikes you as odd if item level were the end-all, be-all? The best trinket isn't the highest item level. That one is actually number 3. On Molten, it's actually more like number 4. One of your best trinkets is actually a crafted item that was available from day 1 of Wrath of the Lich King's release. This item level 200 trinket is on par with any in-game trinket. On retail, you would have been using this until they released Ice Crown Citadel. It's only slightly worse than Deathbringer's Will, a level 264 epic, but it's even better than a trinket of a much higher item level, Needle Encrusted Scorpion, which is a 232. Gear score is simply not everything. So, how do you figure out the right way to set up this gear? How do you know what the right combination of items is? There are a few right answers here. First off, if you're mathematically inclined, you could always do the calculations yourself. That can be very tedious, however. So another option is to look for the old 3.3.5 spreadsheets used by many people on different forums for Ret Paladins. This is what I do for my rogue, but for my paladin and many of my other DPS tunes, I prefer to use a program called RAR. Most of you will by now be familiar with the best in slot list used in most paladin forums. If not, I will put a link to it below for you to peruse. This list was made using RAR, as were many other best in slot lists that are in common use, and I'll show you how to use it. So here we are, we're looking at RAR. We've got it in here, and you have these different tabs up here at the top. You can decide what your professions are, what your spec is, talents. You're going to have different specs that you can put in there. You can fill out the predetermined ones, or you can do a custom spec. You can put your glyphs in here. You can tell it what buffs you plan on having up and active, and then you can do other graphs like changing the rotation around, telling what the parameters of the fight are going to be. And then you go in here to the comparison section, and you're going to check on these different slots, and you'll tell it what helm you have access to. You're going to tell it what necks you have access to. Either gear that you know that you'll have access to really quickly, or gear that you already have in your bank and you're ready to use it. Or things that you plan to make if you want to make a wish list for yourself. And you can put all that information in here. You tell it what enchants you have available. You tell it what gems you've got available for yourself, the different buffs, things like that. And then you're going to go to Tools, and you're going to hit Optimize. And you're going to search it for different things here. I find that RAR is really only good for, it's really good for DPS tunes and maybe even for healers. It isn't so great for tanks because it will ignore, splitting the difference between effective health and mitigation or something like that. And it'll just tell you to do nothing but mitigation, which I don't think is really the best way to go about it. But to each their own. For DPS, it's certainly really good. You can change the thoroughness here. This is going to be how many permutations it's going to go through. If you have it all the way on really thorough, it can take a few minutes for it to go through the different possible combinations, and there are a lot of combinations when you add lots of variables together quickly. If there's only one gear setup that you have available and you just want to know how you should gem that gear, that doesn't take very long. But if you have 5 different slot items for every slot, and you have every possible gem combination and every possible enchant, that could take forever for it to go through. So it's just a lot of stuff for your computer to calculate. You're going to hit Optimize. You can also use it to build an upgrade list here. So these are the things that you've got available to use. I really like this program. I feel like it's a really easy, straightforward way to figure out what the best possible combination of items is going to be. You have to kind of use your knowledge of Molten bugs though as well. It doesn't keep in mind the fact that on Molten, expertise that you need is not quite as high as it was on retail. So there's just things like that you have to keep in mind as well. But it's a pretty good system. As far as gems go, RAR should steer you towards the optimal combination for your gear. If you want to do it manually, I'll talk to you briefly about gems, which are the source of many problems for a lot of players. I think this stems from a lack of understanding of how paladins value stats. The most important thing is making sure you hit the boss. You don't want your attacks to ever miss or be dodged. To keep this from happening, you want to reach 8% hit. Once you reach high levels of gear, especially if you get Tiny Abomination in a jar, you will reach the 8% easily just from gear alone. But at lower levels of gear, you may have to gem for it. I suggest these gems. Keep in mind that you could never reach a 100% chance to hit. Even at 8% hit rating, you'll still have a small chance of missing, but you want that chance to be as low as humanly possible. Expertise is right after hit. This stat reduces dodge and parries. You would need a stupidly high amount of expertise in order to completely reduce parry to 0, but bosses can only parry you if you stand in front of them. As long as you are behind the boss, this is a non-issue. On retail, to reduce the chance to be dodged to 0, you needed 26 expertise. but here on Molten, you only need around 20. The next best stat is by far strength. Without talents, you get 2 attack power for every strength. With 5 points in divine strength, you will get 2.3 attack power per strength. Strength also scales with raid buffs, unlike attack power or most other stats. Moreover, Seal of Vengeance doesn't just double dip from strength, it triple dips. It gets boons from attack power derived from strength, from spell power, and from attack power affecting weapon damage. This is the stat that, once hit capped, you should be stacking above all else. Crit is good too, but it's simply no match for strength and relative value. For this reason, once you don't need to worry about hit anymore, you should go ahead and pick up Inscribed Ametrine for your yellow sockets. This is assuming, of course, that the item has only a red or yellow socket. As a general rule, you want to pick up any socket bonus that is +4 strength or better. Blue sockets are pretty bad. You only want one so you can activate your meta, a Relentless Earth Siege Diamond. The best gem to use for this by far is a Nightmare tier. Use Roar to figure out which slot to place it in, or if you want to do it manually, put it in the item which has a blue socket and also has the best socket bonus. For all other items with blue sockets, you should just go ahead and ignore the socket bonus as if it wasn't there. Sometimes you see Paladin gemming straight haste or crit. This is bad. We've already gone over how Inscribed Ametrine can be used in yellow sockets, but you never want to gem pure crit. Haste is worse than crit. Attack power is a good stat, but not when compared to strength. Some might question this, since many of the best in slot items for Ret Paladins are agi/attack power items. This is because of the way these items' budget work out, not because attack power is better than strength. Point for point, strength is always better, so you should never gem for attack power. Armor penetration is lackluster for us as well, but it's not a total wash. About a third of our damage is affected by armor penetration, which is not insignificant, but we simply don't benefit from it like hunters or warriors do. All other stats, like spell power, intellect, spirit, or agility, are just abysmally terrible for us, and you should just completely disregard them. Enchants are fairly straightforward. The enchants you should be getting, omitting for just a moment the profession-specific enchants, are for your head, Arcanum of Torment, shoulders would be Greater Inscription of the Axe, chest will be Powerful Stats, cloak, Major Agility, bracers, Greater Assault, hands, Crusher. There's a hit enchant also, but you don't want to get it unless you cannot reach your hit rating without it. Legs, Ice Scale Leg Armor, feet, Ice Walker. If you're not above the hit cap, if you're at hit cap, you want to use Greater Assault. And then for your weapon, you want to use Berserking. My best advice that I can give to you is to get some type of a crafting profession. Herbalism, alchemy, mining, skinning, these are all pretty terrible professions with respect to the way they affect your DPS, even though technically alchemy is a crafting profession. While harder to level up, you're ultimately better served by getting some other crafting profession. The best would be jewel crafting or blacksmithing, but all the crafting professions provide approximately the same amount of benefit, excluding of course alchemy. Now let's talk about the way you spend your talent points and which glyphs you should choose. The spec I use is 11-5-55. The cookie cutter that I see for most people looks of something like this, but you have a little bit of wiggle room. I don't use exactly this spec, and based upon how you play and what your raid group normally looks like, you could maybe do something like this. Divine Intellect can be swapped out for increased healing and less fear and disorient time, and if you aren't the one that usually buffs might, you might opt for Vindication over improved Blessing of Might. For PvP specs, you'll get talents like Divine Purpose and Guardian's Favor, but that's a bit outside the scope of this guide and my area of expertise. One spell that I really love, and I feel that is grossly underused, is Aura Mastery. This spell just absolutely abounds with usefulness. For one thing, it works with your Crusader aura, and you can cast Aura Mastery even while you're mounted. If you want to be the first one to the docks, or to cap the flag at stables, done. But beyond being good for burst speed every few minutes, and the obvious PvP benefit when used in conjunction with Concentration Aura, Aura Mastery is excellent on any boss fight with bursts of AoE raid damage from a specific school of magic. I'll give you an example. For Lord Marigar's Fire, you can use Frost Aura and Aura Mastery together and save anyone who's too slow to move. Save yourself if you aren't able to move fast enough, or save anybody who's spiked and in the fire at the same time. You're suddenly the superhero DPS of this fight. Fast forward your raid to Blood Queen Lanethil. Once she goes up in the air and starts raining shadow damage down over your whole raid, you can pop Aura Mastery and bam! All of a sudden, it's like your whole raid has an extra 260 shadow resistance out of nowhere. Which, of course, they do, thanks to you. When Cindergosa grips your raid, you pop it with Frost Aura, and perhaps a few stragglers who are slow running out of Blistering Cold will now survive it. When the Lich King casts either Infest or Remorseless Winter, you get the picture. This spell provides heaps of utility. Now, while I'm talking about specific spells, this seems like a good time to mention some known bugs. We'll start with the good and move to the bad. I'm going to focus on the ones that affect Ret Paladins only, more or less, so you'll have to look at a tracker if you want to read about bugs for protection and holy specs. These are all confirmed and known bugs. One bug that actually works in our favor is the Blessing of Kings, Blessing of Sanctuary bug. Kings gives you 10% to all stats, and Sanctuary gives you 10% to both strength and stamina. These aren't supposed to stack, but on Molten, they do. This doesn't really give you a big advantage over anybody else, but you should be aware of it. Another bug that is kind of good and kind of bad is the bug with Seal of Command. Currently, this seal hits harder than it should, but less often and only off melee swings. Even though it's not as good as it could be for AoE DPS, it's still better than Seal of Vengeance, or Corruption if you're Horde, which takes time to build up momentum. I will talk more about when it's appropriate to use which seal in the next section. Exorcism is another serious bug. Currently, it resets your swing timer, even while instant cast. Like any other spell that you cast that's not instant cast, you get melee in the middle of the cast. When Exorcism is instant cast, however, from Art of War proccing, it's not supposed to affect your melee swings. This ends up hurting our DPS by a little bit. From my own testing, however, I found that I still do a bit more DPS keeping Exorcism in my rotation than by totally omitting it. But to do this, I use a macro for the other offensive abilities in my rotation. What I do is put a /start attack line above the ability's name. I found that this does help, if only a little. The last bug, strictly speaking, is in the protection tree, but I want to include it here because on retail, it was another big utility spell to coincide with Aura Mastery in the Holy Tree. Divine Sacrifice is bugged on Molten. You used to be able to use this as a Ret Paladin by casting Divine Sacrifice and then using Divine Shield, your bubble, to absorb the full amount of damage while taking none yourself, since your bubble would absorb it all. It was an extremely useful ability for fights like Blood Queen Lanethil and Marrowgar. The bug here is that even with your bubble on, you still take damage. And not only that, apparently the damage can exceed your total hit points and kill you. There's not much utility in using the talent if you end up dying as a result. The last part, and probably most important part of this tutorial, will cover how you actually play the game. The first thing we'll talk about here is your rotation. Typically, when somebody uses the word rotation, they actually mean that you have some specific spells that you cast in a specific order each time, and you'd memorize this. And that would be your rotation. For some classes, this is true today, but Retribution Paladins have nothing like this. You're also likely to hear people disparaging Paladins by saying things like, Paladins are just a 2-button class, or it's just face roll DPS, or something else equally ignorant. The truth is that we use what's called a first come, first served priority system. The cooldowns on our spells don't work out neatly, and if you have the 2-piece tier 10 set bonus, Divine Storm can come off cooldown at any time. It's also a big DPS loss to just stand around waiting for the next big skill to come around, so you want to constantly be using an ability. Your priority will depend on your gear. This comes right out of the Elitist Jerks forums, which are now outdated of course, but were current in patch 3.3.5. If you have 2-piece tier 9 equipped, your rotation is Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, Crusader Strike, Divine Storm, Consecrate, Exorcism, and then Holy Wrath. If you have 2-piece tier 9 and 2-piece tier 10, your rotation is Judgment, Divine Storm, Holy Wrath, Crusader Strike, Consecrate, Exorcism, and Holy Wrath. If you have 4-piece tier 10 equipped, then your rotation is Judgment, Divine Storm, Crusader Strike, Hammer of Wrath, Consecrate, Exorcism, and then Holy Wrath. The reason it changes is based upon the set bonuses you have and what the set bonuses do, as you can see here. You always want to use Judgment when it comes off cooldown because not only does it do a lot of damage, but it gives you a lot of mana back too. If you go out of mana on a fight, your DPS is going to drop off dramatically. Once you get that 2-piece tier 10 bonus, you want to move Divine Storm up in your queue for sure. If you aren't keeping it on cooldown, then you're going to waste any refresh on the cooldown you get from your set bonus. Now that we've established what the priority system is, how do you use it? Spam. You constantly want to be spamming. This is by far the best way to DPS. If you want more info on why this is so, check out Kripp's guide, How to Do Top DPS in WoW. It's in my World of Warcraft playlist, and I also have a link for it below. Basically, you do it to reduce the effective latency. The faster you spam, the better. You also want to be thinking a step ahead so that you can start spamming your next ability as soon as your current one goes off. There are 2 general ways you can do this, with add-ons and without add-ons. If you want to play without add-ons, then I would suggest you use a setup something like this. Have all of your primary abilities set up in order so that you can tell at a glance what ability you should be using next. This is one of my alts, another Paladin. The action bar is set up so that the abilities are all in order, and I've keybound everything. The reason you want to keybind it all is because hitting keys beyond 5 sucks unless you have gigantic hands. For most players who have normal-sized hands and who use WASD for movement, 1 through 5 are ideal keys for spamming, along with Q, E, and F1 through F4. The farther your fingers move, the less important the binding should be. Now what I feel is the preferred method is to use some kind of add-on to keep track of this for you. On my Paladin, I use an add-on called CLC Ret. It's not the only add-on that does this type of thing, but it is, in my opinion, by far the best for Ret Paladins. It was made specifically for Ret Paladins, by Ret Paladins. What it does is show you 2 icons. The first one will show you what ability you should be using at that moment. The second one will show you which ability you should be using next. As you use the first ability, the second ability now becomes the first, and you get a new ability for your second. This allows you to be constantly thinking a step ahead. It has the added bonus as well of freeing up space on your screen. Since this add-on keeps track of cooldowns for me, I don't need to keep track of those same cooldowns on my action bars, and I can hide them using various action bar add-ons. This has the end result of not only helping me increase my DPS, but also leaving me with a less cluttered UI. Keep in mind, however, that these icons are just icons. They can't be bound to anything. You can't interact with them, they just tell you what's coming off cooldown and when it's coming off cooldown. Okay, so now we've covered first come first serve and how to use that smartly. The next thing is, what seal should you be using? The answer to this question is really straightforward. Because of the way Seal of Command is broken on Molten, you want to use Seal of Vengeance on any fight longer than 10 seconds. Seal of Command is superior against fights with multiple targets only. I believe on retail you would use Seal of Command on any fight that was around 45 seconds or less, but here on Molten is just hugely out of proportion. I have a graph that I've made based on data that I got from attacking a heroic training dummy. As you see, after about 10 seconds, Seal of Vengeance outpaces Seal of Command. This leads to the next issue: how to open up on a boss. We know what to do during the boss fight as far as first come first serve goes, but is the opening rotation different? Yes. Let's assume that the boss is going to be a single target. We will exclude fights like Gunship or ICC for this. Let's first go into a brief but profitable digression about Seal of Vengeance or Seal of Corruption if you're Horde. It has 3 sources of damage: Seal of Vengeance, Judgment of Vengeance, and Holy Vengeance. The way this spell works is that every time you hit the boss with a melee swing, you apply a stack of this debuff, which stacks up to 5 times, and which has a duration of 15 seconds. This debuff is called Holy Vengeance. After you have 5 stacks, your attacks give you direct holy damage and continue to refresh the duration. Note that melee attacks, and Hammer of the Righteous coincidentally, which you won't be using, are all that apply this debuff. Divine Storm and Crusader Strike benefit from the debuff, but do not apply it. Now on top of that, each stack of Seal of Vengeance on the target increases the damage your judgments do by 10%. So once you have 5 stacks, your judgments are hitting 50% harder. What this means is that Seal of Vengeance takes a few seconds to ramp up. Look at the chart here. This is the damage done by type for the same heroic training dummy over a 2-minute fight without using Avenging Wrath. I wanted to do that to keep things fair. The areas in red are all from Seal of Vengeance. Righteous Vengeance, even though Vengeance is in the name, is a separate thing. It comes from the second to last talent in the Retribution tree. I realize that I'm only presenting a sample size of 1 here, but you're free to duplicate my results, and I think you're going to find that your percentages vary only by a little bit from mine. In mine, over 43% of the damage is tied up in Seal of Vengeance. So let's go back to how to open up on a boss. Considering that you're probably going to be always using Seal of Vengeance, and how this spell works, and how much of your damage it constitutes while you're using it, it's obvious that the very first thing you want to do against any boss is get those 5 stacks up. This means no exorcism until you get to 5 stacks, ever. If you remember, they reset your swing timer and would thus slow the accrual of stacks. You also don't want to lead off with Judgment, since you don't need any mana back. You should be at max mana at the pull anyway. Since I use a Libram of 3 Truths, I start off with Crusader Strike so I can build up my stacks of Formidable faster. I want as many stacks of Formidable as I can get when I hit 5 stacks of Vengeance. Once I have that, I pop my wings. A typical opening timeline would look like this. You start off with your potion right before the pull, and as you start attacking, all your trinkets and rings will activate. Most often, this is when a raid uses Heroism, or possibly a few seconds into the fight, but it won't make a big difference for you because even if they use it 10 seconds in, your whole Avenging Wrath buff will still be contained inside of that. The best way to keep track of these things is with some kind of add-on. CLC Ret will allow you to track whatever buffs or debuffs you want on either yourself or your target. Need to Know is another great add-on for this, along with a long list of other similar add-ons. I suggest monitoring, at a minimum, your Seal of Vengeance stacks, your trinket, and your ring procs, and Avenging Wrath, of course. It would also be a really nice idea to monitor your Libram stacks if you're using Libram of 3 Truths, Heroism or Bloodlust depending on your faction, and your potion. The very last thing I want to cover in this guide that I didn't really mention at the beginning, but which kind of falls into this last category, is tips and tricks that I have on specific boss fights in ICC and TOC. There are probably lots of other tricks that are out there that you can use that I haven't discovered myself, but these are the ones that I use on a regular basis, and I'm happy to share them with you. For the bosses in Trial of the Crusader, for the first boss, the Beast encounter, you want to make sure that you have your wings enabled for Ice Howl. You can use them early on in the fight, but when Ice Howl hits his stun, he takes a lot of additional damage, and you can really explode your DPS by making sure you have Avenging Wrath available to coincide with his stun. So just time things appropriately. For faction champs, make sure you're ready with Hand of Freedom and Hand of Protection. You can use Freedom on yourself so you don't get slowed down. If you're human, you can also use Every Man for himself. Use Protection against Clothies in your raid so they don't get blown up. This is also a great fight for Seal of Command. For the Twin Valkyrs, make sure you have your wings ready whenever they use Pact. If the raid's DPS is low, you also want to make sure you have Bubble ready to go so you can survive when they do that AoE spell. For Nubarak, realize that this is going to be a seal swap fight. When you're just burning the boss, you want to use Seal of Vengeance. When he burrows, switch to Seal of Command, and try not to let your stacks of Formidable fall off. Use Frost Aura if you can in Phase 3, so when he does Penetrating Cold, you can use Aura Mastery. It could really save some raid members. In Icecrown Citadel, the first boss, Marigar, you want to use Aura Mastery with Frost Aura when he uses his Bone Storm ability to help anybody caught in the fire, as I already mentioned. If somebody's spiked on this fight, you can also remember that you have Hand of Reckoning that you can use on the spikes to damage them while you close the gap to them. Just be careful that you don't accidentally taunt the boss. You can also use your bubble here to tank the fire or the cleave for a few seconds to break a tank out if they get spiked as well, assuming you don't have a Death Knight around to grip them to you. For Lady Death Whisperer, be ready with a Hammer of Justice and Repentance to stun your heavy-hitting melee if they get Dominate Mind. I advise against seal swapping here, since you could mess it up and cause a wipe really easily. Stick with single target. When raid members with Dominate Mind are around you, make sure you're not using Divine Storm. It hits really hard, but Consecrated will be fine. On Gunship, use Seal of Command. Pay attention to your Librams off here as well. Keep it from dropping off by using Crusader Strike more often than you otherwise would. Use Exorcism and Hand of Reckoning on your targets that are far away, and make sure you save your wings for the mage. On Festergut, don't get hit by Malleable Goo when doing this on Heroic. This slows your attacks down dramatically. Keep your camera positioned in such a way that you can see them coming from far off. On Rot-Faced, if you use your wings early on in the fight, you should be able to bubble for his first explode. You don't even have to move out of the way. For Professor Putricide's fight, when the green ooze explodes, it will blow you way back. Position yourself so that when you're blown way back, you land near the boss. That way you can get a melee swing in on him and refresh your stacks of vengeance. Keeping these from falling off will greatly increase your damage. You should also attack the boss from the front in Phase 2 and Phase 3 so that you don't get hit by choking gas bomb. Malleable goo shouldn't be an issue, but make sure you don't get hit by that either. For the Blood Prince Council, make sure you use Hand of Reckoning on the kinetic bombs to kill them. It's a really fast way to get those damage out. If you get too many stacks of Shadow Prison, just remember to either stand still or use Divine Protection or Divine Shield to be able to soak that damage up so you can move around and get wherever you need to be. You can also use Fire Aura and Aura Mastery to soak damage from Empowered Flame, or you can use Shadow Aura and Aura Mastery to soak damage from either Shadow Prism or Empowered Shadow Lance. That will be in addition to using Divine Protection or Divine Shield for that. Use Wings on Tal'Daram on that fight, since you're going to have to run out all the time on Valinor, and since you can't use Divine Storm on Kel'Thuzad. That greatly hurts your DPS. Every time Tal'Daram comes around, that's when you want to pop your wings. For Blood Queen Lanathel, make sure you can use your wings whenever you get bitten. That's crucial to that fight. If you are human, you can use your Racial to ignore her fear, every man for himself. You can also use Aura Mastery with Shadow Aura to soak the damage from her Blood Bolt Whirl, in addition to bubbling yourself. Sacred Shield is also going to help you soak a bit of damage, since you won't have a second bubble around if you have 2 air phases. For Dreamwalker, make sure you use your Holy Wrath spell on the suppressors to stop them from casting. You can stun all of the mobs in this fight. Repentance works, Hammer of Justice works, and the Fear Undead works. This is also a fight where Seal of Command excels. Don't be afraid to throw around some heals on the boss as well, whenever you have time in between killing mobs. For Syndagosa, make sure you pay attention to your timers. You don't want to waste an Avenging Wrath by having it clipped by her air phase when you can't attack. Remember the spells that you can use while you're running out of her grip before she casts Blistering Cold. You can use Consecrate, Holy Wrath, Judgment, and then when you're all the way at range, you can turn around and use an Exorcism. You also want to use Frost Aura and Aura Mastery when she does her grip in case anyone is slow running out. When she starts to fly into the air, use another Consecrate wherever the tombs are going to be stacked so that you can start damaging them even before you're damaging them. You also want to make sure you Seal Swap on this fight to Command to AoE the tombs down and then go back to Seal of Vengeance whenever she's about to land. For the Lich King fight, you can use Consecrate right before the boss pulls wherever the main tank is going to be standing, along with a pre-pot. If you happen to be close to the Shamblings, once they are safely being tanked by the off-tank, you can occasionally toss out a Holy Wrath or a Hammer of Justice to stun them, so the off-tank takes less damage. When you're on the edge in the first transition phase, in addition to dispelling your off-tank, you can use Hand of Reckoning or Exorcism on the orbs to assist the ranged DPS. If you want to get a few extra seconds in on the boss, you can use Divine Shield on the last 10 seconds of Remorseless Winter and run in and attack the boss early. Just don't get hit by an orb. This may or may not be the way to go, since you might not be able to pop wings with Heroism depending on how your raid times Heroism. The Ox can be stunned with Hammer of Justice and Holy Wrath, so don't forget about that if you're going to kill those. And if you are at range, you can also use Exorcism and Holy Wrath on them. Don't forget about those abilities. If you still have Raging Spirits up in the final phase, make sure you switch to Seal of Command to AoE them down quickly before going back to the boss. It's just a lot better when you're killing 2-3 mobs at a time. Aura Mastery can be used with Infest or Remorseless Winter depending on which aura you use as well and how you time it. That's pretty much it. If there is anything I've neglected to mention in this guide, you have my apologies. Hopefully you have found it informative. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you liked the video.